Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China's Taiwan region is facing the worst water crisis in 56 years. The danger is real. The drought is putting pressure on crucial semiconductor manufacturing at a time when global companies are competing for chips. And the local authorities are taking criticism for their drought alleviation approach. So here's a question. Will the drought pose a threat to the global supply of semiconductors? And what are the political ramifications? To discuss all these questions, I'm joined by Andy Lee, correspondent in Taipei, Professor Zhang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics at East China Normal University. This is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Andy in Taipei, welcome to Dialogue. Let me go to you first. We've heard this many times. This is the worst drought Taiwan is facing in over a century. The reservoirs are bottoming out very fast. What is the latest that you've got? How bad is the situation?
Oh, the situation is getting worse as we speak, day by day. Right now, the situation that I have on hand is that the local authorities here in Taiwan, they are coping with it in a method of a roster. 5 days with water, 2 days no water. But some people are saying that the situation is getting worse already. And if it continues to get worse, the roster will be 4 days with water and 3 days without water. So yes, the situation is going way worse than we have ever expected. And just an update on the latest information on the reservoirs, okay? The reservoirs in Tainan, it is at 0%, no more water. And the reservoir in Taichung, that is already down to 4.48%, which is less than 5% water remaining inside the reservoir in Taichung. Now, in the northern part of the island, we have the reservoir in Shimen Reservoir. It is down to 30%. That's the latest situation on hand right now. And we'll get to TSMC when your question arises.
Right. Of course, unfortunately, the reservoirs are bottoming out. How about residential use of water? How is the drought impacting lives throughout, the island?
Okay. Now, that is another very good question I would like to share with our viewers. How are the local coping with the situation? Now, if Taichung City has no water for Tuesday and Wednesday, what do the people in Taichung do? They must take a bath, right? That's the very least you have to have. So they take buses. They pay 100 NT for the buses to take them to Miaoli to take a bath. Because when Taichung is without water on Tuesday and Wednesdays, Miaoli has water. So there are different
take a shower,
rosters,
right?
Different rosters. To take a shower, 100 NT.
Wow.
That's about, well, the exchange rate for renminbi is 4.3. Well, we can do the math on that. Yes.
It's really
So
unfortunate.
that's how the locals are coping. And one more thing I would like to add. Now, when you have water for 5 days, right, you want to store water. Okay, so many people want to store water. Everybody in Taiwan wants to store water. So how do we do it? We buy buckets, right? We buy huge buckets. So if everybody's buying huge buckets, the store that sells these huge buckets, they're out of stock. So people who are late coming in to buy the buckets, empty buckets to store water, what do? They have to improvise. How to improvise? Well, this is funny, but this is the fact, this is the truth. They buy baby swimming pools, those plastic inflated balloon baby swimming pools, not for babies, to store water. That's how the people are coping with it. It's tough, really tough.
I mean, many are asking this question. Taiwan is, located in the subtropical area. It is an island surrounded by water. How come there's such a big water shortage? What caused this drought? Is this more of a man-made disaster or a natural disaster?
It's a bit of both. Now, climate change and all that. Yes, climate change is bringing changes to the climate here on the island of Taiwan. Now, we are not having any typhoon from last year, so that is one of the natural causes. No more typhoons coming to Taiwan. Hopefully, we will have typhoon coming. So many people in Taiwan are saying, oh my God, I used to hate typhoons. I used to dislike typhoons, but Now, come to think of it, typhoon is sort of a blessing in disguise. It brings rain. It brings rain to the reservoirs. Now, you mentioned a very good issue, Mr. Wang Guan, that are there man-made causes? Definitely there are. Definitely there are. Why am I saying this? Because the reservoirs in northern Taiwan, central Taiwan, and southern Taiwan, the management was not very good. The management is in fact poor. Why am I saying that? Because these reservoirs, they have sand and sediments filling the bottom of the reservoir. So a reservoir that could hold 100 tons of water, because of so much sand and sediments that were not cleaned for many years, decades, their water filling capacity is not at full capacity. For example, a 100-ton dam with 50% sand, you could hold only 50 tons of water. So that's down 50% already. So in spite of, even if you have typhoon, if you even have monsoon rain coming in, the capacity of the dam is down. That's the man-made cause that we have to take into account.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Professor Zhang Gong in Washington right now, let me go back to you. How do you look at this disaster, this drought in Taiwan right now?
Well, I totally agree. This is a combination of both man-made disaster as well as natural disaster. I think the fact that there was no typhoon for the whole year last year is probably part of a bigger climate change picture we've seen last year in the entire Southeast Asia, East Asian region. I think this is experts have been debating whether this is just temporary or it's going to be for the long run. I think if this pattern continues one more year into next year, then we'll be very serious about the long-term water sustainability in island of Taiwan. And also, on top of this, I think people have been saying that the water pricing in Taiwan has been too low. People haven't formed this habit of saving water, conserving water. And also the infrastructure seems to be a lack of improvement as well as maintenance. I think your previous guest was mentioned that the water reservoirs have been in lack of maintenance. But I think the entire water distribution infrastructure is also in much need of repairment as well as improvement. There are stories about water leakage. So this is one area, the infrastructure area, that the Taiwan government as well as the utility companies haven't invested heavily into for a long time.
Yeah, Joseph, how are you digesting this worst drought Taiwan is facing in over half a century? How should we understand this?
Well, I think that it appears to be, a crisis this year, but it's something that has been growing. We can go back and look over the last 5 or 6 years. There's been a lot of research. There's been a lot of discussion about this as a growing problem and as a new trend. I don't think that this year is going to prove to be an outlier, but part of this deeper trend. And I think that to distinguish between man-made versus natural crisis, I think there's a broad consensus that climate change is itself a man-made crisis, and that Taiwan is a leader in emissions in Asia. So this is all part of a bigger problem that has been growing for some time. We can go back and we can find stories from 5 or 6 years ago where there was already tension between manufacturing and agriculture, where there were calls to begin to invest in infrastructure to solve this problem for the long term. And these efforts haven't been made, and I think we're now at on a precipice.
Yeah, Andy, I still want to get back to the drought itself. If things do not
Sure.
improve, if we're not so lucky as to having downpours, what will the government in Taiwan do to really alleviate the situation?
Okay. No, we're not lucky. We are looking at this situation worsening. And so what are authorities in the local government here in Taiwan thinking? I'm sad to say this, but the local government here in Taiwan they do not seem to have a long-term plan. I could say that again. They do not seem to have a long-term plan. So if things come along and it happens as the situation that we have on hand right now, this is the worst drought in half a century. Maybe it'll get to the worst drought in a full century. So what is the government doing to cope with it? You wouldn't believe this, but it's the truth. The government is asking religious groups to help pray for rain. That doesn't seem to be a very effective way that the government should go about doing coping with such a drought situation. But the matter of fact is, the government is asking religious groups to pray for rain, especially coming up in central Taiwan. There is a yearly religious activity, the Temple of Matu. So the people on the island, they believe in Matu, the goddess, and so the people pray for rain through the goddess of Matu, and the government is tagging along, doing the same thing. Now, that is not the solution to things. The solution to things would be to, I believe one of our guests mentioned that very good idea is to increase the charge that we charge for people for water. If you are charged more for your usage of water, naturally, human instinct, human nature, you would conserve water. So right now, if you could buy huge buckets, if you could buy 10 huge buckets, then you could hoard water. Then you could use water just like your everyday life, taking a bath, taking a shower, jacuzzi and all that. But what about those people that couldn't afford to, they could afford, they just didn't get the stockpile of buckets. They could just buy baby swimming pools, inflated swimming pools, and that doesn't store much water. So there is a difference between the amount of water that you could hoard. So, but they all get charged the same price for the usage of water. So if you could charge a higher price for the usage of water, that may be a long-term plan. So that's
on that note, I want to ask an economist there, Professor Zhang Gong. Andy talked about the pricing of water, what could have been done that was not done. As an economist, how do you look at the economics behind this crisis?
Oh, absolutely. There's a living example of how to deal with that situation through the price leverage. For example, in Southern California, which is an area that is chronically in short of water, the local utilities, the public utility commissions have approved very sophisticated pricing plans for the water in a way to incentivize people to conserve water. I think for a long time, the overarching principle of utility regulation has been, keeping the price down for preventing the monopolist utility company from charging too high a price. But on the other hand, we've been sort of ignoring the other purpose of regulation, that is for the conservation purpose. And I think definitely, I will point to one example in Southern California where there is a living example of using very sophisticated and actually quite successful regulatory mechanism, pricing mechanisms to regulate usage, not just price, but also regulate usage and incentivize people to conserve water resources.
Joseph, do you also see policy failures, both short-term and long-term, perhaps the cost by the DPP, the ruling party on the island of Taiwan, that may have cost or contributed to this current water crisis, this drought?
Well, we do see that some members of the opposition, Kuomintang, are trying to make hay out of this. And from the DPP side, they're saying, well, you didn't deal with the problem either years ago when you held power. But I think that what we have to come back to is that what we're seeing in Taipei is a spectacular lack of vision and political maturity. There are, in fact, 4 intersecting crises that are firmly eroding Taiwan's position right now. One is climate change. 2 is the friction between U.S. and China. 3rd is the friction between Taipei and Beijing. And 4th is this growing consensus, particularly in the United States, that certain tech industries like semiconductors are supply chain choke points. And we're going to see already this new national industrial policy in the U.S. emerge that is going to try to disconnect the United States, not simply from China, but also Taiwan, because we can't rely on Taiwan with these increasing political and environmental risks for this vital industry. And this is what's, I think, been really misrepresented by DPP over the last several months, is that although they've done a good job handling COVID, they think that they have this increasing position vis-a-vis their ability to produce semiconductors, but this is being read as a vulnerability in the West. And I think that what we're seeing is a long-term strategy that is going to not fare very well for the DPP or the people of Taiwan.
Well, Andy, how do you look at this issue of semiconductor? We know that semiconductor production consumes a lot of water, and agriculture, yes. On the other hand, agriculture accounts for more than 70% of water consumption in Taiwan. We're talking about growing rice and fruits. But the irrigation policy that favors chip makers over rice farmers has led to increased tension between the two. Are farmers bearing the brunt of Taiwan's worst drought?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Yes, the agriculture sector, seems to be bearing the front because first, now let me get back to the residential water usage. You have 5 days with water, 2 days without water. That's for the residential areas. Now, for the irrigation of the farms, they're cutting the water supply as well. Yes, for the farmlands, there's water 7 days a week right now, but then the water supply is dwindling and dwindling. The water pressure is dwindling and dwindling. Less and less water. Yes, you have 7 days a week water, but the water supply is very small, just enough, barely enough. And why is that? You put it very well, because industrial output comes first as far as the economy of the island is concerned. Okay, this is an export-oriented economy. This is not an agriculture-based economy. So, of course, you prioritize. And so the water supply for the industrial areas goes first. Now, however, that said, the water supply for the industrial areas are also decreasing in pressure. At 60% water pressure for the Hsinchu Science Park, and at 40% water pressure for the other industrial areas in South Taiwan and Central Taiwan. But luckily, you still have 7 days a week water. Now, as far as the chip makers are concerned, one of our guests put it very well. It's a choke point. It's a choke point without the drought, and now it's choke point and choke point with the drought. I live in North Taiwan. I live in New Taipei City in the area of Xingdian. Now, we have neighbors in my little community that works at TSMC. So when I dump my garbage, we meet, right? So I talk to them about how's TSMC faring? Andy, not so good. I said, how's not so good? TSMC is keeping a very keen eye on the situation. If the drought situation gets worse, the production may be affected. Now, as a matter of fact, right now, do you know how TSMC is coping with it? TSMC is paying to hire and rent water trucks to go out into Hsinchu area and pump up underground water and bring the water back to TSMC. That's how they're coping with it right now. That's for right now. But if the situation gets worse, who knows what may happen.
Yeah. You have to think about the environment as well when this all is been done. People are talking about this online and on social media. For example, Clarissa Wei said this: everyone keeps on talking about this drought in Taiwan as a one-off thing. And oh my God, the semiconductor industry might be affected. But no one is talking about how drought will be a sustained reality in Taiwan, which will create massive security issues and heightened inequality. Professor Zhang Gun, is that a legitimate concern and worry?
Well, I think again, I said that once if this thing continues again, we have to really suspect there's going to be a long-term trend, and that is going to be a serious problem for Taiwan. I think Professor Mahoney made a very good point. There are certain industries, for example, the semiconductor industry, as you mentioned, is such a critical choke point, not just for the Taiwanese economy, but for the entire global economy. for the entire global value chain. And there's some speculation. I mean, there's some suggestions about whether such a vitally important point in the global value chain being just located in an area that is susceptible to not just natural disasters, but also maybe even political risks. Given the political development in Taiwan right now, I think there's real concern, at least in the West, that something has to be done. In terms of securing the global value chain, in terms of securing the adequate supply of such a critical piece of equipment and critical piece of product that's going into so many products that impact people's lives.
Yeah, Joseph, we're talking about semiconductor, an area you know quite well. We're talking about also a time of rising demand for semiconductors where competition of semiconductors, let's say, is cutthroat. How will this drought play a role in future high-tech purchases?
Well, again, I think what we've seen with DPP propaganda has been trumpeting again this performance dealing with COVID and their support and the strength of the semiconductor industry in Taiwan as a ascending position for our Taiwanese political clout globally. But I think if you look at what's been happening in the United States over the last couple of days, you have Debbie Stabenow, for example, a senator who has been pointing the finger at Taiwan, blaming the Taiwan semiconductor industry for shortage for chips for the American automotive industry. And although this is an unfair accusation, I think what we're seeing is that there will be this political blame game coming from the West and this desire to distance itself from Taiwan in terms of semiconductor production. And again, what we are seeing is this new national industrial policy where we're going to see the development of the semiconductor industry in the United States itself. So I think we're going to look at a long-term situation where this economic strength is going to be undermined in Taiwan because of both the environmental and political risk. As John understands, capital cares about risks, and it will move away from risk over the long term. In the short term, Taiwan's going to take advantage of this, but I don't know what the long-term strategy is here. I think it falls apart.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit right now and really talk about what can be done, what can be fixed to really, get the people of Taiwan out of this water crisis, out of this drought. Andy, with the drought, there's criticism that Taiwan authority has failed to renovate the old and inundated, leaking water supply system, recycle water, and build and maintain an effective water conservation system. Do you look at that way too?
Me personally, you could always blame the government. Well, the people blame the government for everything that they're unhappy about. But the government, for this drought problem, yes, they're trumpeting their COVID success, but that will not carry out into this drought blame game when worst comes to worst. People will blame the government for their mismanagement or poor management. And the government knows that. The local government here in Taiwan, they know that. So they are trying to get on the good side of the people by asking for rain from religious groups. And, by doing so, you could put the blame on natural causes, right? To shift the focus away from blaming on the government. But that said, at the very end, you need to have a solution to the root problem. You need to have a long-term management. You need to have a long-term plan. From my personal perspective, that is what the local management are lacking here in Taiwan. You have to have the sediments removed from the dam. That takes time, that takes money. You have to build more dams. You have to raise the charge that people have on usage of water. And you need to, look at it this way. You take the example of Singapore as well. They are an even smaller island, right? But do they have water shortage problems? I believe they do, but there's a wet season and a dry season, they manage it pretty well because they have long-term planning. I really don't want to get into politics on this issue, but it has to do with politics because the politicians on this island, they, sad to say, they don't think long-term. You know how they think? They think about 4 years. Then they think about 4 years. Then they think about the next 4 years. You know what I'm talking about, right? So that's how far the politicians see. They plan for 4 years. That's it. You need to plan for 4 decades on this issue. Okay.
Yeah. I've been to
Or
Taiwan,
more.
and to be honest with you, I thoroughly enjoyed the political debate, on the TV screens of Taiwan. But I would have liked them to be able to move beyond their differences and fix the problems long term, like you have said. Professor Zhang Gong, let me go to you. Tsai Ing-wen was criticized for ignoring the warning of meteorologists who alerted the authority months ago that this island is facing severe water shortage in the spring. Could the water crisis trigger a political one?
I think if the trend continues, if the situation worsens, I think this is going to be a political liability for her. Especially, this is the first time I heard about what David was saying about the government's resort to religious means to trying to get out of the water problem. And this is even more ridiculous and laughable to me. I mean, it sounds like a medieval government to me. I understand a lot of people in Taiwan, they have religious beliefs. I'm all for that. They believe in God. That's great. And also I offer my own prayer for these people. But the problem is that the government, as a ultimate guarantor for people's safety and security, this is not the way to go around about things. You have to have a long-term plan. You have to make long-term investment to anticipate the worst things to come, to prepare for the future. And I think in this regard, the Tsai Ing-wen government, falls grossly short of a responsible government for long-term planning for something like this, as vital as water supply. Water is, just like breathing air. It's so important. People cannot live without water. It should have been planned for a long time ago, and the infrastructure should be there. So I think in this regard, her government really disappoints people in Taiwan. This is something that I think she will have to pay for in the next political cycle.
Yeah, many people argue that governance, that is all that really matters, no matter where it is. Joseph, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that Taipei is trying to take care of the situation, but it's really in a reactionary position. I agree that there's not the long-term strategic planning. That's a problem with the DPP, but it was also a problem with the KMT. And as you noted, you wish that you enjoyed seeing the debate, but you didn't see the outcomes when you were visiting Taiwan. And I think that that's the reality that we're approaching, and that they're going to have to figure out a solution for if they want to move forward.
You know what, Andy? I really hope you and our fellow compatriots over there will get over this crisis soon. Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for bringing us the latest. Joseph, Zhang Gong, Professor Gong over there in Washington, thank you both so very much. And thank you for watching Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.